My name is Chris Wharton, and I'm an associate professor in the nutrition program at Arizona State University. And I'm extremely excited to have Jean-Martin Fortier here to offer this incredible workshop on profitable small-scale farming. This is a collaboration that's been months in the making with a lot of organizations, and I want to just call some of them out now. So Kelly Young, for example, at U of A Cooperative Extension, helped put this on, along with Steadfast Farms and Eric Schultz. And a number of other folks are contributing to this event. So I just want to make mention of one of the other organizations involved in this workshop. It's called the Food Systems Transformation Initiative. And so this is a new organization at ASU. It's one that I direct. And it's really focused on broadly equitable participation in the food system. And that means we really care about food security and people's ability to have access to healthy, oftentimes locally produced, culturally appropriate, affordable food. But it's also about ensuring that people can have livelihoods in the food system. And so this event is really an important piece of that. We really care about having an integrated and diverse food system and allowing people to have the opportunity to be producers and participate in the food system from that perspective as well.
I want to talk to you about the bio-intensive method of production. And I put it under commas because this is not a dogma, this is not a religion, this is not a copyright thing like some people do. This is just an approach. But one of the key elements when we're talking about marketing crops is that in most mixed diversified organic farms, the tractors are not only used for shaping soil and plowing, they're used for cultivating. Okay? And so when you use the tractor for cultivation, what happens is that the spacing between the rows is determined by your cultivating tool. Usually, most farmers will have one or two of these implements. So everything is standardized to the tool. Wide spacing, a lot of bare soil. Soil exposed is what you want to avoid because all of the microorganisms in the soil, all of the soil's biology wants to have soil covered. It's like an open wound. It really is. So that's a necessity of modern farming because we've decided that the tractor is the ultimate way to do cultivation. Since we didn't have a tractor, we looked at how close we could space the crops to have more yields per square foot, but also because we wanted to have the crop form a canopy. And that's where it gets interesting because the canopy shades out the weeds. So let's say you might be less effective when you're cultivating, but you'll need to do it only once, not 3 or 4 times. And also, that canopy retains a lot of the moisture on the surface of the crop. And so that's good for not only the vegetable, but for all the microbial and biological life inside the soil. So you're creating a cover crop with your crops. So there's like a lot of advantages to that. When we started out, there wasn't that much information about if you're doing this on 30-inch, what's the number of rows, the spacing on the rows. So we did a lot of trial and error over many years. And basically our first assumption was that we wanted the leaves of the crop to touch one another at 3/4 of their growth. That was the starting point. Okay? Then, as I started to research more into intensive systems, I realized that if you want to have the benefit of the canopy and the benefit of the high yields, it all boils down to soil structure. Okay? Because if you want to have crops that are really close to one another, you need to have their root systems be able to shoot down as deep as possible. And in most farming systems, soil is worked and a lot of the time overworked. And when you work your soil, what happens is that you create layers of harder soil in the subsoil. Not specifically hard pans, but just layers. And then when you're a root, you're shooting down and you want to follow the path of least resistance. And then when you hit that ground, you'll want to go sideways. And then what happens? If you space your crop really tight, Crops will compete for water or for nutrients. So intensive spacing without deep soil will only generate crops that are not desirable, lesser yields, crops that are not big or beautiful. So it all comes down to having really deep, loose soil. And the question is, how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that in a market garden where your life depends on it, your livelihood? And so that's been what's been driving us over the years, finding the right tools, the appropriate technique that allows us to develop this soil structure. So there's many ingredients to that recipe. But the first one is permanent beds, because we're not working the soil and we're not compacting it. So in traditional farming setup, you'll have the plow, the discs, the harrows, the bed shapers, and then you need to go with a subsoiler because you've just went 30 times with the tractor. So if you're not compacting, you don't need to decompact. So that's the starting point. Okay? Is this too theoretical for you guys? Or this is like the part of I think people need to always think about later on as you'll go out and do your own things. This is the basics. So root systems, they tell a story. They tell the story of soil structure. Okay? I'll get back to that question, but if not, make sure to answer it again, okay? Well, they can go, it's amazing. They can go pretty deep. But actually, your crop will tell you if it's working or not, okay? So it's not an exact science. But the principle needs to be understood. The deeper the root, that means that your roots are able to go down. Sometimes they'll go 12-inch. So that means you have good soil all the way to the bottom. Okay? And so if you have root systems, you can dig up your soil, you can make a profile, and then if your root system looks like that, then you know you have a problem. Or what you know is that you can't space everything really close because it's not going to work. Because the roots are going to keep growing, but they'll go sideways. So pictures of our farm, what it looks like with these intensive spacings, and we're maximizing the space, the yields, but also look at the ground, how it's covered by the crop, which makes a big, especially in a climate like here where things are so hot, that canopy, I'm sure, will make a huge difference on the yields. Yes? Yeah, well, that was the start of it, and then we figured out, okay, beets. Is it better to have 4 rows every 4 inch or 3 rows every 6? We kind of played with that. Eventually, the spacings that are in the book are the ones that we use in that work. Okay? So, beans. Yeah, and they're laughing. I don't know why, because picking beans is not funny at all. Okay, broccolis. So this is a very different way of looking at production. Little note here, these are tree planting bags. When you're harvesting, you always want to make sure that both of your hands are working. Okay, again, harvesting is half of the work on the farm. So all the gestures, all of the movements, they make a second or two difference, and you're repeating the same thing all over. So you want to be as effective and efficient as possible. Harvesting summer squash, both our hands, put them in the bags, and then we go shooting down the lane. You see 18-inch? Imagine 12. That would mean that you're stepping on the crops. Okay? When you break the leaves, that's the entry point for diseases. So that's another reason why you want to have it spaced just a little bit more, making sure that you're not bruising anything. 100-foot row of intensive spacing of anything is a lot of production. Just one bed. Yes? Well, that's a great question. I would stick to 18 because there's no point in spreading out more. You'll see later on there's a lot of advantages of having everything as compact as possible. Okay? So this is what our farm looks like. When we started, these were unfamiliar territories. It was pretty rare, uncommon, you would see a farm like that. The only one I had seen was Elliot Coleman's one. Okay, so as we grew into this, it became obvious that there was a lot of advantages to doing it that way. And that became clear to me as I began mentoring small farms that were starting out. Most of them were on a tractor setup. They were doing 5 acres, 200 baskets. They were generating not enough income to go through the winter. They had to find work. The fields were a mess, super weedy. It was pretty rare that you would find a farmer that was starting out and was saying everything is under control. And one of the reasons is that when you spread out like that to accommodate the tractor, it's the only reason why you would want to have rows, is to accommodate the tractor. And then you're there using row covers or insect nets. If things are spread out 5 times, more, that means you need a row cover that is 5 times bigger. 5 times the cost, 5 times the amount of time it takes to do the exact same thing, which is cover your carrots. Or reversely, it goes 5 times faster if you're using intensive systems. So a gain of 5 in a busy day for covering, for watering, for cultivating, for scouting is a lot. Okay, so built into the design of the farm, you have efficiencies that are into it. Makes a big difference, okay? So on our farm, row covers are a big part of it because of our winters. We want to be extra early in the spring. So, if I would need to have 2 acres, let's say 2 acres covered compared to 10, it's a different ballgame. Covering 10 acres of row cover when there's a big wind is 2 days' work. For me, it's about 2 hours if I need to redo them all. You see where I'm getting at? Makes a big difference. Talked about watering. We use overhead sprinklers because we don't have shortage of water like you guys have here. And plus, certain summer I don't even water because there's rain every week. So overhead sprinklers, but the same line that I set up, if it's able to water 5 times more crops, that's 5 times less work that I need to put into setting up the sprinkler lines. Okay? So trying to build an argument for this is what I've did for many years. Now, it feels like I don't need to be bragging about it, but it works. So these are the spacings that we use on 30-inch, and yeah, they work. They work, and they're going to work tomorrow, and they've worked before. That's all in the book. And I know that it works because that's how things were done before. That's a picture that was taken by Elliot Coleman, and it's a farm that he visited in France in the early 1970s. And that was a farmer that was working like his grandfather had been around Paris. And when he saw that farm, that was where he saw that small intensive systems could really be productive. And then he came back, and then he started his own farms mimicking what he had seen over there. And so this was the traditional way of doing market gardening in France. Nowadays, I go to France and I show this presentation. People don't believe what I'm saying. And I'm saying, well, this is how it used to be here. And still, it's hard for people to take in because we're so used to having rows. We're so used to having the tractor ingrained into the setup. You're thinking that if I don't have a tractor, I'm not efficient. But there's an implication to designing the whole system according to that tool. Okay? So, you'll be cultivating perhaps less fast, but you'll be cultivating once, and eventually the crops will shade out the weed. There's a lot of benefits to that. So we talked about row covers, but insect nets are also a big part of how we manage insects on the farm. So insect nets, we'll talk about them later on, but it's a mechanical solution and it works. And the problem if you're in a conventional setup is that when you need to be cultivating, you need to not only remove the nets, but also all the row covers, all the hoops. So that's a lot of work. So most of the growers I know now, they're not cultivating with tractors under the nets, they're cultivating with hoes, but with wide spacings. So it's totally inefficient. Okay? So then it would be just easy and fun if they could just do intensive spacings, but then that doesn't work if you have a mechanical transplanter. And then your beds are 4 feet wide. And then you haven't paid attention to soil structure. And then. So that's why I say it's not either or, but if you're designing a farm, these make a difference. You're either intensive or extensive. To do both kind of won't work. Better to have one field managed intensively with its appropriate tools and techniques, and perhaps have other fields that are more mechanized. That would be a better approach, I think. So 5 rows of carrots on 30-inch, still pumping out nice sized carrots. Okay? So the carrots are not perfect. Most of them are crooked because we have rocky soil. It doesn't make a difference because our clients, what they want is freshly harvested sweet carrots. That's what they care for. That's what we do. Okay? This is my wife, my girlfriend, my spouse, whatever. It's all the same person when I talk about her. So just as you know. Actually, we have in Quebec, we call our girlfriends our blonde. Okay? And so she's my blonde. And so what we've done on the farm is we wanted to have quality. Quality is our trademark, so we want to have quality crops. We want to have as much yields as possible because we have limited space. And we want to have caliber. So we don't want everything to be super small. We wanted to strike the balance for these three. And we've achieved this on the farm. Okay? So close spacings, we're still getting quality, we're still getting quantity, and we're getting caliber. All of this is not done by magic, however. It all comes down to how we work the soil or not work the soil, how we fertilize it, crop planning, crop management, so a lot of management. So we've intensified the production, but we've also intensified the management of everything. Okay? So, close spacings, create canopy, still get nice roots. I'll share with you 2 more stories before we take a break, okay? You guys good? I'm not boring you guys out here? Because it's going to be a long day if it's boring, I tell you. Okay, so because of our land constraint, and we keep having demand for what we do, we've been looking at ways to have more yields on the same acreage. And that was really forced us to look at things differently. One example, we used to plant onions in rows like this, like these. One onions after the other. And then we simply change our pattern of planting where we're transplanting onions in set of 3. Okay? So it goes 3 times faster to transplant the onions, which is what we want. It's also a lot easier to cultivate between them. And we get more yield per square foot. Different way of doing things, different result. We're not limited by the spacings of the rows. We can plant in gridlocks. We can plant however we want because the tool will get adapted to what we want to do, not the other way around. Okay? Leeks is another that we had to reinvent the way we were doing things. It took us many years to grow nice leeks because basically we didn't know what nice leeks were. It took all of the French people at our market to tell us. And I don't know if you guys have French people from France in the community here, but they have a very funny way of complaining about things. They would say, oh, JM, your leeks, you know, you obviously don't know what you're doing. I feed them to the pigs. My grandfather knew how to grow leeks, you obviously don't. There was one lady, she would always complain about the leeks. And the reason is because in France, they only eat the white part. And the rest, they throw it to the pigs. And so the challenge is how to grow leeks with super long white stems. And the way you do this is that you bury them as they grow, like we all do. So if you're burying leeks, if you're hilling them, that means you need to have 2 rows on 30-inch because you need to have enough space to be able to mount with dirt. And so we've changed the pattern where instead of hilling them, we're burying them. So we have a leek dibbler, we poke a hole, and then we drop the leeks into the hole. And the size of the dibbler is the size of the white blanched stem that we want. So a little bit of customer care here. We went to the lady and said, Madame, how long do you want your leeks to be? We will customize to your liking. She said 10-inch. She said it in centimeters. And then said, okay, let's make the leek dibbler there. And then we just poked the hole. And then we wanted to speed it up, so instead of having a 1-hole dibbler, we made a 3-hole dibbler, and there we go. And why is this relevant, this story? It's because we went from 2 rows to 3 rows for the exact same amount of leeks. It's 100% more production. So that was a big gain for us. That's the kind of approach that we've had on the farm. It's so easy when you have all that space to spread out. But when you don't, it forces you to optimize and grow from within, which is really my message. Grow better, not bigger. And by doing so, you'll become more successful. Okay? You'll manage your resources better, and you'll get more production with less labor. People don't believe me. That's fine, but I know it works because I've seen it elsewhere. So picture of the leek dibbler. So if you want to do this, you need to start your leeks a bit earlier. They need to be quite tall. You need to have 1 inch popped out of the soil. And then, so that woman she really trickled me. And it's because she kept saying how we were not good and her grandfather was a great grower, and then we knew nothing about growing crops. And it was like, well, I think I'm a pretty good grower. So I researched some of that, and I got really interested in having super large leeks. So now what we do is we bury them, and then we put straw over them. And then we just blow everybody away at market. It's like, Madame, I'm sure your grandfather didn't have leeks that are 12-inch white. That was enough of her. Okay. Another story. We used to have 2 hoop houses, 16 feet wide. We would grow field tomatoes. And then I started to visit greenhouse operations. They were growing tomatoes with a lot more success than I was having. And so we replaced the 2 hoop houses with one 32-inch greenhouse. So same space, but just bigger volume of air because we heat them, makes a big difference. And we changed the techniques where instead of growing field tomatoes, we're growing greenhouse tomatoes, and we're terracing them, and we're using indeterminate varieties. We're grafting the tomato plants. The lady that was there, I think it was you, talked about grafting classes. That's the great way to avoid having disease, but also more production. So we learned how to graft. We learned how to have different spacings that we were used to. We learned how to trim, count the number of fruit per cluster. We learned how to work the plant up, bringing it down. All of these techniques because we hired an agronomist to teach us how to do this. So for 3 seasons, an agronomist that was specialized in professional greenhouse techniques came to the farm every month and showed us how to do this. And our production went from X amount of pound per week to 20X on the same amount of space. Okay? Now we harvest 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of tomatoes per week that we sell for $3 at farmers market. Makes a big difference in our yearly income. Yes?
What did you say
32 by 100. Which replaced the two 16 feet by 100 low tunnels. Okay? So, tomatoes harvested, mature on the vine, fully flavorful, and a lot of tomatoes. Okay? So again, it's another example. If we would have been not struck with this land constraint, we would have grown more field tomatoes in hoop houses and just spread out, having to bring water further out, having to bring, better devices to bring back the products. Now we've just kept everything close, we've intensified, and boom, more production. Same thing with cucumbers. We learned how to trace them. More yields per square foot is a great approach to profitability. We harvest 100 cuc a week in these 100-foot row, okay, that we sell for $2.50. So again, the take-home message is we've learned how to do things differently because of the land constraint. So this is just quickly how we do. We have really cold springs, so we grow the tomato plants in the heated nursery up until they're quite ready to be giving fruits, and then we transplant them in big pots into the soil that we've heated up with plastic.